The date is February 13th. It is 3:52 p.m. And this is an interview of Governor Carcieri. Governor Carcieri is in Florida at the time. There's a conversation over the telephone between Corporal Kenneth Bonaiuto and Governor Carcieri at headquarters. And this is a conversation regarding Economic Development Corporation and 38 Studios. Good afternoon, Governor.
Good afternoon, Ken.
Again, I do appreciate your time.
No, happy to.
Okay, Governor, quickly, I know I've learned a lot through the last several months about the EDC. And one of the things that I believe that I've learned is that as governor of the state of Rhode Island, you were officially the chairman of the board for EDC. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in the statute when it was reorganized. I've forgotten what year, Ken. The whole board, we went through a whole process and reorganized the whole thing, and then legislation was passed, and it made the governor chairperson of the board, but non-voting, I believe it was, unless in the case of a tie. So you were ex officio, I guess was the terminology. I don't remember how the statute said it exactly, but I attended virtually all the meetings.
Okay. And as a board member, what would be the duties of the board member of the EDC?
Well, it was essentially, there were several aspects of it. A lot of discussion at that time, Ken, was what the direction of the state in terms of economic development. Part of the reorganization stemmed from wanting to sort of bring together the policy direction, what kinds of industries, where we were trying to focus, what kinds of programs you needed, which previously had been done by, it was a separate, now it's really trying to remember what it was called. It was a business group, sort of a round table, but had been separate from EDC. A lot of business people on that council, and so the idea was to bring the strategic policy sort of direction from the council together with the operational day-to-day aspects of EDC, which was, trying to do everything it could to encourage businesses. I had a number of programs that I'm sure you're aware of to help businesses starting up. A lot of outreach to small businesses. When I was there the last few years, there were, a lot of efforts to try and, I remember we had a huge effort to try and keep Brown and Sharp, I think it was, that became Hexagon. Right. They were going to leave the state, had been across Rhode Island for years. So from the board's perspective, it's to oversee generally the strategy, and there were votes normally if there were specific approvals required that came to the board, and the board would have to approve those. So it was generally to oversee, the board's responsibility was to oversee both the operational aspects of the Economic Development Corporation, as well as I said, sort of oversee a strategic plan in terms of where we were focusing.
Okay, and was the board's vote, was that binding with the corporation? Did they have to follow suit on the outcome of the vote by the board?
Generally. I mean, the board is voting approval or not on a specific resolution before it, Ken, and that approval gave the operating people at EDC, the executive director and his team, authority to go ahead with the steps necessary.
Okay.
I mean, if something were to occur after the board's approval, for example, that the operating staff there came back and said, you ladies and gentlemen approved this, but we've made some changes, or we've changed our mind on something, or we think we should come back to you. That can happen. No. So it's not that you must do this, if you will. It's more giving them the authority to go ahead and do what's been outlined to the board.
Okay. All right. And so at some point in time in, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2010, the idea or the presentation to the board was made regarding 38 studios and their interest in coming to Rhode Island. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, there were a lot of sessions on that, Ken. Okay, because I think I've sort of talked about it publicly. I was asked, how did we even find out about it, and I think you're probably aware. I had actually gone up with my wife to a fundraiser that Schilling was having for PBS because he had done a lot of work. He was big into supporting the military, and that Band of Brothers, I think PBS locally was trying to do a sequel to that. So he did in a fundraiser, and I've forgotten somebody there at the State House who, who was it? I mean, Tim Gray, was it Gray? Somebody, I think he worked at the State House, was telling me about the project, and so we went up and, contributed toward the project, and in the course of that, that's about the second time I'd met him. He had come down, he and his wife were big into, I think it was ALS. They were big supporters of and contributors to ALS, and I think there had been something in Warwick a few years before where I'd met him, but not to talk business. And so in the course of that, I had said, what are you doing? And he just described that he was doing business and what he was doing, et cetera, and that they were thinking of expanding. And so I said, well, if you're thinking of expanding, then, you should look at Rhode Island, and a number of things happening. So that's how the introduction started, and I don't remember, I think it was back in the winter, if memory serves me. And then there was a process that I really don't know I didn't keep track of, to be honest with you, in detail, but back and forth between, his team and the EDC people, which often happens, and then coming out of that over a period of, I think, a few months, was the idea that, hey, they really would consider coming to Rhode Island if we could help them with the financing that they needed. And then there was a lot of meetings, Ken. Okay, there were public, or where this thing was introduced that we were considering. Then, as the EDC team did more work on it and really delved into it, I think there were at least 2, probably 3. The board minutes would reflect this.
Yeah, I have them in front of me, and what I see is I see a couple
meetings. I remember a couple of meetings at least where I think this whole board spent probably 2 hours. These were not public; these were private meetings with the ED staff, with some of the people from 38 Studios side, their management team, just really going through this thing in great detail. And that's why I was always kind of upset at the notion that somehow this just happened quickly and there wasn't a lot of due diligence. No, a lot of work went into this on the board's part and on the EDC's team part. So it was over several months, and I think the final vote was sometime in the summer, if I recall, in 2010.
Yeah, it looks like maybe July 26th of 2010. Looks like when the vote was.
All right.
And there was a prior public session on June 14th, 2010, I believe, where there was some presentations done by Strategic Analytics, I believe it's called, where they kind of presented a PowerPoint, if you remember, really on not specifically 38 Studios, but on the gaming industry as a whole, and how the cluster idea would work in Rhode Island. Does that sound familiar to you? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the board felt that this was an area we didn't know a lot about in terms of the industry, and so EDC did hire, and that's the firm. I don't remember the name of the firm, but that came in, did the whole presentation and overview on the gaming industry.
Okay.
And at the time, we had identified sort of what I'll call generally digital media as an area that we might, see if we could build in the state, because you had RISD had quite a good program there all around digital media. Hasbro was expanding. They built a studio up there in Pawtucket. And the whole, not just gaming, but the broad, as I said, the broad area that I'm calling digital media seemed to be a growing area, and it's an area that the board, as part of the strategic planning, felt would be a good fit for Rhode Island, in that it's generally they're high paid, they're pretty technical, highly skilled people, so the living environment in Rhode Island is something that would appeal to those kinds of people with a rich higher education environment, and they tend to feed off of one another. So I think with that as backdrop, at the time, the board felt that this was an area that we should pursue. 38 Studios specifically looked like a unique opportunity for a company that was in nearby Massachusetts to relocate to Rhode Island and bring a critical mass, if you will.
Right.
So yeah, that was the kind of the thinking behind it, and we had a number of outside people giving the board and the management there an overview of the industry and the trends in the industry.
And Governor, what was your understanding of what 38 Studios would need monetarily to come to Rhode Island?
Well, I think originally, the deal was always, it got to at some point, and I don't remember exactly when, Ken, but, the $75 million was talked about in terms of the loan guarantee program that the General Assembly had put in place. And they were looking for, if memory serves me, outside investors. And one of the things that happens, if you and I owned a company that we owned all the stock and we needed to raise capital, and you go to outside investors because, they want to take over your company or take a major controlling interest in the company. And so I think that Schilling and his team at the time, the attractiveness of the loan guarantee was that they could retain, control of all of the equity in the company. From the state standpoint, that was not necessarily bad, in that if they needed more money, then we were prepared to give them, or the deal finalized that. Then, the thought was they could always bring in private capital at that point and relinquish equity in the company, but they'd be better positioned to do that. But so at the time, it was talked about as pretty much the way the deal closed. And there were all kinds of, I don't remember all the detail, but there were a lot of reserves and other things that had to be set up as part of the whole package. So I think they actually got probably, if memory served me, somewhere around $50 million or slightly less. Right. The rest went into reserves to pay while they were, building up the business. That was the plan.
So am I correct in understanding that you understood that they needed $75 million? Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but were there financial?
No, the deal was $75 million. That they would not be getting $75 million. That was pretty clear in all of the documentation that the board approved.
Okay.
But there were cash flow, and I don't remember all of them, Ken, at this point. But I know there were enough as part of the due diligence. The board, there were cash flow projections because they had, which showed. The financing that they would be getting from us should be adequate to complete the game, because remember they had another game already in the works.
Right.
And so it was a little bit, the cash flow, as I recall, anticipated the completion of the first game, and then proceeds from that would provide capital for the company along with the state's money to go into the second game.
Right. No, and I know this is difficult because we're not face to face, and I can't show you some documents, but I've looked at some documents that indicate on a financial projection that that $75 million was going to get them to a point where they were going to be able to produce and market this second game, which then, I guess, ultimately would have made them successful. But in reality, they weren't getting 75 million. When you spoke a moment about financial projections, did you see them, and did you see the $75 million in that projection, or was it a lesser amount?
That I can't remember. You know, I just can't remember, Ken. I know there were projections, and the projections were, you know, a piece of the projection was the anticipated proceeds from the completion of the first game.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I don't, to be honest with you, I don't remember whether that projection had 75 million coming from the state or whether it had the 50 million, because you know, they would have known. I mean, the deal closed with the proceeds as it was outlined in the final deal.
So if I was able to, and I can't obviously, but if I was able to show you a projection that showed, you know, their financial projection several years forward with a full 75 million in there, what would you, if you had seen that as a board member at the time of the vote, would that have changed your mind? Well, not that it would change your mind, but would it have raised an eyebrow, or would you had concerns knowing that they actually weren't going to get a full 75 million?
Well, it would have raised questions in terms of, you know, if you're only going to get 50 from the state, where's the other 25 going to come from?
Right.
You know, and you know, listen, you know, my days in banking, et cetera, I learned a long time ago. Lots of times projections is just that. Mm-hmm. You know, and sometimes, you know, in all honesty, borrowers will project needing more money sometimes than they really do. Right. You know, because they'd always rather get as much as they can. Mm-hmm. But I think that, you know, I don't remember, but certainly if it had shown that without the 75, they were not going to be able to complete the game and complete the projection, then yeah, I think that would have required a lot more discussion, because, as I said, there would be other alternatives for them, presumably, but I don't recall that discussion coming up.
Are you okay? So you probably just answered my next question. I was going to ask you: were you aware of anybody from 38 Studios coming back to EDC when they realized that they weren't actually going to get a net figure of 75 million? It was really a gross figure, and the net figure was going to be considerably less. Were you aware of anybody from 38 Studios coming back and saying, "Hey, this isn't enough. We need more"?
Well, I don't, you know, I know that there were discussions going on. There was a lot of negotiations all around the closing of the deal, okay? I was not a party to any of those, Ken, so I don't know what, you know, what discussions were going on between 38 Studios and EDC. So, you know, certainly, you know, if there had been major concerns about that, you know, then that would have been flagged up. Okay. And to my memory, it was not. Okay.
And the loan guarantee program, when that went to the legislators, you know, I guess I'll just ask the question: Did they know, or whoever was presented to? Well, actually, maybe you can educate me a little bit. Was that bill presented to the legislators through the governor's office, or was that something that was, you know, how did that come about? I guess if you know.
No, I don't remember all the details. All I know is that you know, EDC came in and said, look, what had been approved was a $50 million program, but you know, that if we're going to entertain, even, you know, not that any decisions have been made, but if we were even going to entertain 38 Studios and see if we could get them to come, that it was going to take a bigger program. Now, as far as I know, EDC really, you know, worked with, you know, the leadership in the House and the Senate. My team, to my knowledge, I was not involved in that. I don't think anybody on the staff was. I think it was pretty much EDC carrying that. Okay. And then got the program amended. to the larger amount. So at least there would be the scope to do this should the board and the EDC decide they wanted to do it.
Okay. All right, I'm going to change topics just a little bit. Tax credits. As a member of the board, were tax credits discussed, and was it an opportunity? Was there always an opportunity for 38 studios to apply for tax credits, or is that something that came down the line, or were they prohibited at the beginning, and then the door was kind of open later on, or how did that all work, if you know anything?
I don't, when you say tax credit, I assume you mean the film credit.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Because there were a bunch of other tax programs that EDC ran, Ken.
Okay, yeah.
There was some talk about, I think early on, would the film credit program be better way to approach this? I think, but if memory served me, that would have required, a change. That would have required legislation as well, because there was no such, film credit program in place with large enough.
Uh-huh.
And I think at the time the feeling was, and I don't remember how much discussion. I know in my mind, tax credits are an immediate giveaway.
Mm-hmm.
I was not necessarily ever a big fan of the film credit program, because that just gives a filmmaker cash, or gives him a credit that he turns into cash.
Mm-hmm.
But it's immediate. Cash out of the state is tax receipts.
Right.
So, and I think that the appeal of the loan guarantee was that, it might only be a call on the taxpayers or the state if the business failed. Mm-hmm. Now there was, I think there was no discussion that I recall that, at the board at least, and I don't recall even anything much outside of approaching using the the film credit program. There was some thought, and I think in the aftermath of it, and again, I don't recall any discussion at the board, but I might have had a discussion with Keith. I don't remember, but if going forward there was a need, you could have done this with the film credits. With hindsight, Ken, it probably would have been many fewer questions, and none of this had we just done it with film credits, because they're out, they're gone.
Yeah.
The fact that we tried the board and EDC tried to structure it as a loan guarantee, so that the state would only possibly be on the hook in the worst case if the company failed.
Okay. So these tax credits really just came towards the latter end of the company's survival, just to try to keep afloat, I would imagine.
That's my sense, okay? And again, this is a pure guesswork on my part, because I was, long gone after that, and I have no knowledge of what discussions were going on. But, it doesn't. You can kind of put yourself in the shoes of the players at the time, and I could understand that they were scrambling for more capital.
Yeah.
That I had heard rumors that there was private money willing to go in, but that private money might have said, "Listen, we need, a little bit more help from the state in the form of the film credits." I don't know any of that. This is just pure,
speculation,
pure conjecture on my part. But so it's very possible that was going on.
Okay. Anything that I haven't asked you or we haven't discussed you think is important, information that I might need or should have, or?
No, I think, if you've got the minutes, you've talked to all of the board put a lot of work into this. They really did. And in the notion that this was just, it's always easy the Monday morning quarterback. But, this was a company, yes, everybody knew there was a risk here for sure. But, Entertainment Arts had financed their first game. which was sort of, how would I say, a sign that somebody who knows the industry had some degree of confidence in them that they could complete a game, which they did, by the way. And the management, they had the technical group, a creative group that was very impressive. So I think that, on balance at the time, given all of the inputs, I think the board felt that, with one exception, and I think, if memory serves me, and what his name just went out of my head. He's got the little company down Richmond.
Carl Waddington?
Carl, yeah. And I know Carl pretty well, and Carl's only issue was the amount, and I understood that. A lot of people understood that, but the board generally felt, look, we've got to try and do something here to see if we can, kind of jumpstart a potential industry that could employ, high-paid people in an area with growth prospects.
Right.
The state's been, struggling to find areas which would be a natural, and we felt that was one that could be a natural.
All right. Just one other question came to mind.
Yep.
And if you were here, I'd be able to show you the financial projection sheet that does show the $75 million as a net versus a gross amount that they were getting in their financial projection.
Is that the only one, Ken? Because there were a lot of different meetings, and I thought I remembered, several. So was there? And I just don't know. This is more as a question on my part. Was there no financial projection done after that, or reflecting lower proceeds?
Not that I haven't seen anything as far as financial projections, as far as a spreadsheet with a lower number. There are some documents that were part of the closing documents that words to the fact of net proceeds of the $75 million loan would be sufficient. It was in writing, but nothing as far as showing numbers. No sort of a spreadsheet showing projections across several years.
I don't remember. There were so many documents and so many things at the time that were put before the board. I just don't remember.
Well, would you have any reason or any idea why somebody that may have known that this financial projection was out there within EDC or anywhere else, and would have known that, hey, if they don't get the $75 million as a net, they're probably going to fail? Was there anybody that would have benefited from them, moving forward with this or pushing this through or whatever it may be, or withholding that information from the board?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, everybody, so much work went into this at EDC at the board. I mean, everybody was really excited that this was, really going to be something good. I can't think of anybody who would have benefited from a failure, or anybody benefiting from going ahead, even though it was going to put them in a more difficult position than having to raise additional capital somehow, some way.
Right.
No, I don't know. Certainly nobody on that I'm aware of on our team would have benefited in any way.
Okay. All right, Governor, I do again thank you very much for your time.
Happy to. Any other questions occur to you, I'm happy to. It's sad what happened, and 300 people out of work, and
it sure is, yeah.
And obviously, I think that things that could have been done to salvage it, but that's for another day, another time.
Right. Well, again, thank you very, very much. I don't anticipate that I'll probably have to reach out to you again, but I guess there's always that possibility. But
feel free.
Thank you.
Feel free, Ken. Don't worry about it.
Governor, thank you, and you have a good day.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This ends the interview with Governor Carcieri. It is now 4:21.